This is part 2 of the Chapter 5 lecture on plant diversity. We left off with this chart, but we didn't finish with it. This is a chart that shows you the classification of the land plants, how they're grouped. So there are non-vascular plants called the bryophytes, and they are seedless. And then there are vascular plants. These are plants that have vascular tissue. That means they have like vessels or veins that transport water and minerals and nutrients throughout the plant. Within the vascular plants, there are seedless plants, and they are divided into the lycophytes and the pterophytes. And the lycophytes include the club mosses, the quillworts, and the spike mosses. So these are not true mosses. The true mosses are bryophytes, but there are lycophytes called the club mosses and the spike mosses. And then the pterophytes include ferns and also whisk ferns and horsetails. But ferns are probably, for the seedless vascular plants, ferns are probably the most common, the most well-known plant. Just like for the seedless plants, the bryophytes, the mosses are the most well-known. And then we have the seed plants, and they're all vascular. They are called the spermatophytes as a group, but they're divided into the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Gymnosperm means naked seed, and it's going to include pine trees. A lot of the plants in the gymnosperms produce cones, and the seeds are found within the cone, but they do not all produce cones. But the thing that distinguishes the gymnosperms from the angiosperms is that the angiosperms produce flowers and fruits. So the seed is found within a flower, and the fruit is actually the protective structure for the seed. The gymnosperms have naked seeds. The seeds are not protected by a flower or a fruit. This is the phylogenetic tree of plants. And this shows you the ancestral green algae. And then that ancestor diverged 3 times into the charophytes. And then these are called the coelacanths, but I think that we call them chlorophytes in lab. But anyway, there are 2 different types of green algae. The chlorophytes or the charophytes are the most closely related to land plants, and the coelacanths are ones that we didn't really talk about that much. But I'm pretty sure they include the chlorophytes, which was the spirogyra, the volvox, the ulva. We learned several of the chlorophytes in lab. And then we have the land plants, which start off with the bryophytes, which are the non-vascular plants. And then there are 2 groups that went extinct, which we will not really study that much. And then there are the lycophytes, which have several groups that have gone extinct, but they include the club mosses, the spike mosses, and the quillworts. And the pterophytes include the ferns and the horsetails and the whisk ferns. And then the spermatophytes include the gymnosperms and the angiosperms, which both produce seeds. So the lycophytes all the way through the spermatophytes are vascular. And then the spermatophytes are the only ones that produce seeds. All right, so we will start talking about plants with the vascular plants. I'm actually used to teaching starting with the simplest and then going to the more complex plants, but we're going to start with the vascular plants. And vascular tissue contains 2 types, xylem and phloem. The xylem conducts water and minerals absorbed from the soil up to the shoot. So the xylem goes from root to shoot. And the phloem travels in the opposite direction. It transports food produced in the leaves by photosynthesis throughout the entire plant. and many times that food makes its way to the roots, and the roots will store it, the simple sugars, as starch. So xylem, basically, just remember, is from root to shoot, and then phloem is from shoot to root. Okay, plants need protection because obviously they're non-modal. They can't move. They can't run away from predators. So they do have a cuticle, which is made of wax, and that's the outer covering of their leaf, of the leaves of plants, and it protects them from drying out, which is called desiccation. But that cuticle prevents the intake of carbon dioxide, so the underside of the leaf is not covered with a cuticle. And so the underside of the leaf contains the stomata, or pores, that allow water vapor, carbon dioxide, and oxygen to move in and out of the leaf. They can close these stomata if they want to conserve water. They can open and close the stomata at different times. So then it says plants evolved biosynthetic pathways to make protective flavonoids and other compounds, pigments that absorb ultraviolet wavelengths of light and protect the aerial parts of the plants from photodynamic damage. So that's just other pigments in the plants and flavonoids, different chemicals like that, are produced to protect the plant from the damaging ultraviolet rays from the sun. Kind of like melanin protects our skin. So plants co-evolved with animals. We notice that plants will evolve poisonous toxins that discourage predators from eating them. And they also developed sweet and nutritious metabolites. Metabolite just means nutrients or chemicals. So poisonous toxins or sweet, nutritious nutrients like fruit and nectar to lure animals into helping them disperse their pollen or disperse their seeds. So we see many, many examples of this. The green algae share more traits with land plants than any of the other algae. And the specific green algae that are the closest related to land plants are the charophytes, and that's what you see here. They form sporopollenin, and they form precursors of lignin. Lignin is found in wood, and phragmoplast, and they have flagellated sperm. But since they do not exhibit alternation of generations, they can't be classified in the kingdom Plantae. Okay, so the non-vascular plants, there's several pictures over to the right of non-vascular plants. Excuse me. Excuse me. The mosses are going to be like this is a moss, and this one is a moss. There are mosses, there are liverworts, and there are hornworts. And this is a hornwort, and this is a liverwort. So they're not as well known, but the mosses are. So the non-vascular plants are all seedless, and they're small. The dominant life stage, the dominant stage of their life cycle is the gametophyte. So in a moss, for example, this structure right here that we see, the little green moss that you see growing, whenever you look at moss, you think of that green carpet looking plant, that feels really soft and fuzzy. The green part is the gametophyte, and the sporophyte portion grows as a stalk up out of the gametophyte. in order to produce spores. So they have to be, all of these plants have to be very short. All of the non-vascular plants are collectively known as bryophytes. And make sure you know that the three examples are liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. And here is a picture of liverworts. What you're looking at, the little green leaf-like structures, are the gametophyte portion of the liverwort plant. They're the most primitive. They're very closely related to the first land plants. This is showing the liverwort life cycle. So basically what you have is a female gametophyte and a male gametophyte. The gametophyte is the flat leaf. And then what happens is the gametophyte structures divide by mitosis to produce the male gametophyte, which contains antheridia, produces the sperm, which are haploid, and they contain flagella, so they swim. They swim to fertilize the egg. And then the archegonia is the female gametophyte structure, and it produces the ovum or the egg. They're calling it the egg. Okay, sometimes they call it the ovum, but anyway, it produces the egg. So the sperm swims to the egg and fertilizes it, and that becomes a zygote, and the zygote grows into an embryo, and the embryo grows into a slender stalk called a seta, and that's where meiosis occurs, and meiosis produces spores, and those spores are haploid. The spores grow into a thallus with rhizoids. Now, rhizoids are similar to roots, but they're not roots. They don't have vascular tissue. So rhizoids are, this part is the thallus, and then this part is the rhizoid. The thallus is the large green leaf, the gametophyte. All right, these are hornworts, and hornworts actually have stomata, and they do have one chloroplast per cell. And what you're looking at down here are the gametophytes, and then what you're looking at here, these stalks, are the sporophytes. The hornwort life cycle is very similar to the liverwort life cycle. There's an antheridium and an archegonium. The antheridium and archegonium are both haploid, and they are found within, or they are produced by the gametophyte portion of the plant. And the antheridium and the archegonium contain the antheridium produces the sperm, which is haploid. The archegonium produces the egg, which is haploid, and the sperm has flagella, so it swims to the egg, produces a zygote, and then that zygote grows into an embryo, and it shows you right here, the embryo develops into a slender sporophyte, and this is the sporophyte here. And the sporophyte produces the spores, which are haploid, and the spores land and germinate and grow into the gametophyte. And here is a very good picture of the sporophytes of mosses. Mosses have simple conductive cells. They don't have vascular tissue, but they do have conductive cells, and they do have rhizoids, which are similar to roots, but they're not true roots because they don't have vascular tissue. And this is the life cycle of a typical moss, and you can see the gametophyte is the green part of the moss, and the sporophyte is a stalk that grows up out of the gametophyte. And the sporophyte contains a calyptra on the end of it, and that's where the spores are produced. And that will pop off, and the spores will be released.